Good day, pioneers. This is a part of the educator series, and the purpose of these conversations is to help expand educators' tool chests and have honest dialogue about real life experiences in the classroom and beyond. So today we have with us Monique Taylor Gibbs, a veteran educator with a host of experiences in her tool chest that I will let her share with you now. So, Monique.
Yes. So I born and raised in Wilmington, Delaware. I like to say I started my education journey as a camp counselor at Brown's Boys and Girls Club. Then I became a lead teacher at Kingswood for their summer camp. And then I began my formal teaching career at Warner Elementary School, where I taught for 16 years, matriculated into middle school at AI DuPont Middle School. And I am now an assistant principal at Skyline Middle School.
Excellent, excellent. So we're so happy to have you today. And we want to really delve deep into education and what is needed today. So there are a set of questions, and we'll begin with your initial philosophy of education and if it's changed at all over the course of time.
So initially, my initial philosophy of education was just to be the person in the classroom that I would have needed at that time, right? So I just wanted to teach. We all just want to teach. We all just go into the classroom. We want to provide these amazing, engaging lessons. And it has now, after 20 years in the game, I must say, it has now morphed into, I always believe that, being an educator, schools are microcosms of society. And so now that philosophy has broadened to understand these microcosms of society and how we have the duty to provide education. We have the duty and the opportunity to promote change through equity in education, offering education in a holistic manner and in an authentic manner for students. So the foundation of my educational philosophy is just to give students rich experiences that are realistic and easily transferable into the real world.
I love it. I love it. So we'll definitely talk more about what that actually looks like on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that we have seen is that oftentimes students have special needs, and not that they are special needs students, but that in a classical sense of special education students, but that every child has their unique way of learning, a unique set of the history and the background that they bring to the classroom. And it becomes a challenge to meet all of those needs, all of the varying needs.
Yes.
Right? And then we have our cases where, because those needs are difficult for one teacher to meet, we have overqualification of students for special education, for classical special education. So what are your thoughts concerning the number of students in special education these days?
Well, in your introduction, you hit the nail right on the head, right? So children have changed and evolved and have moved with all of the things like technology and things like that, but the basic root of education has not changed, right? And so you still have classrooms with rows and columns, working from worksheets. The new worksheet is the Chromebook, I say, right? Because we want to integrate technology, but it's not being integrated in quite an authentic way for students to utilize it to meet their needs. So what we have is we have students that need a specific prescription, let's say, to learn adequately and appropriately, but we don't have the flexibility in education to make that prescription accessible, right? And so instead of putting the onus on the adults in the institution of education, we try to change students. We don't want to change the adults and the way they teach and the way they, try to engage students. We want to label students. And instead of just looking at how you're teaching and are you meeting the needs of students? The best thing that could have happened to me when I worked at AI DuPont, we are good teachers, and we just never had, to me, people would ask, how do you do what you do? And I always would say, well, if I knew, I would write a book and make money, right? And so the best thing that could have ever happened to me within my first year at AI DuPont Middle School was I was introduced to the UDL framework of learning. And all that is an umbrella of good teaching practices, right?
And what's UDL stand for?
So UDL stands for Universal Design for Learning. So it's not,
Okay.
it's the best way to explain it is it's not lowering the ceiling, it's putting supports in place so that every student is successful. And also understanding that success is not here for everyone. Everyone's success looks different. So the easiest thing for me as a teacher, and my biggest takeaway from participating as a lead UDL teacher within my first year at a new school, was when you're planning, think ahead. As you're writing your lesson plan, you have to think, what are the barriers that my students are going to come up against during this lesson? How is student Z going to respond to this lesson versus student A, right? And so creating those embedded supports that just should come naturally in teaching, and not having the thought of, oh, well, if I give it to them, if I teach it to them, they should be able to do it, and that's it, right? And so that's the problem that exists in education. You have teachers who are not flexible, and I feel like we have inflexible teachers, we have inflexible curriculum. We also have teachers who don't understand students, right? And when you have all of those ingredients, what you get is you come out with a student who will then be labeled and identified because the check boxes of supports have not been checked off. And what I find ironic is when a student gets identified, and I'm not talking about students who might need the labels to get the supports, right? There's two different things we're talking about here. I'm talking about a student who just may be busy, right? Or a student who isn't doing work because the work isn't appealing to them, or they're bored, or they don't know how to say they don't understand it. So what I find quite ironic is when we identify this student who has technically exacerbated tier 1 and tier 2 supports, right? The same thing that we put on their IEPs are the same things that are in Universal Design for Learning, right? They're the support that they should have received anyway initially, and then they would flourish. So I think it's this big, there's just this big disconnect in education. And the most unfortunate part is a lot of the students who look like us, it comes out as a behavior issue in classes. And so it's the rush to get them identified instead of the rush to offer them the emotional support or the academic support or even the behavioral support that they may need on a holistic basis. The other side of that is sometimes, because of the way education is set up, right? The politics of it all. Sometimes you have to identify the students to get them that support. So it's which came first, the chicken or the egg argument. But I think at the root of it is, if we really just jump into how students are being taught and how the schools are structured around their needs, we could knock out a whole lot of this over misidentification and over identification in special education.
Yes, wow. That is a phenomenal answer. And one of the things that stuck out for me about what you said was educators over the years asking you how you do it, and you're grappling at, well, I don't really know how I've done it. If I could figure that out, I'd write a book. And I definitely am continuing to encourage that in you. That's the
Okay.
whole point of this series, honestly, is I'm identifying phenomenal educators that I have had encounters with, and we are trying to bottle up our formulas, okay, and package.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Pass on the goodies.
So it's coming out in this conversation, and you'll be able
Yes.
to listen to it and say, okay, that's what I'm putting in the book.
Okay. Got it.
So you also mentioned about the different qualifications, and sometimes they really are valid. And the next question asks, from your experience, what do you believe are the primary causes for the number of students with ADHD, ODD, anxiety? I think you spoke to it earlier about the microcosm of our society. But I feel like in my 20 plus years, I've seen the increase of students who genuinely need help. What do you see as a cause for that?
So again, it goes back to like how we grew up, right? I didn't spend a lot of time watching TV. Like, you knew what time the Cosby Show came on, you knew what time your specific shows came on, and that hour or so was the most time you spent in front of the TV, right? I never was a gamer, so even when like Nintendo and things like that came out, it was still a specific time. Most of our time was spent outside or with friends.
Yeah.
In person with friends, right? Not texting them all day or FaceTiming. And so one of the things that I really look at, and I really have discussed with all of my hundreds of students over the years is, and what I found is, they are overexposed, right? They're exposed to things, and everyone talks about this, right? How my 9-year-old niece is talking to me about things that I didn't even think to talk about until I was like 13 or 14, right? Technology is a big proponent. Like, when I see iPads in babies' hands, I almost want to pass out. And so that overexposure and access, right? They have increased access. We didn't have all of this access that they have now. So they're overexposed. They have access to a lot of information. There's a lot more trauma going on, and because everything's televised, everything's accessible, they know about it, right? Certain things I just didn't know about growing up. And so because they know about it, we are making our kids more grown too early. And so then you get into the brain development and what's appropriate for developmental ages. And so I constantly have to remind professionals around me, you are talking about a child. Like, no matter how they talk to you, what they said, whether they cussed you from A to Z or said something slick and smart, at the end of the day, these are still children. And so they're overexposed, they're traumatized, they have all of these things going on, but they don't have coping skills, right? And so they're getting all this information thrown at them, all this stimuli, right? But nobody's teaching them how to deal with it. And so then it comes out when you look at developmental stages and ages, and then we look at, things that we know our students have gone through, they don't have the chemical ability. They don't have the mental capacity to cope with these things. And so we know when we're inundated with things, it comes out in different ways. So that's where you get the misbehavior in school. That's where you get, the student who you kind of forget about in your classroom because they don't say too much. They're, withdrawn. Anxiety might be, I'm cutting class because I just can't, deal right now. And so they don't have the coping skills to deal with everything that they're exposed to. Then they're put into schools and given all these parameters and and rules and regulations and things like that, and we just expect them to flourish within just because, just because we the adults say so. But I just don't believe in that, and that's the hardest thing for me as an assistant principal now, right? I can remember a child was having a hard coping moment, right? That's what I call them. You just having a hard moment, sweetie. And she came into my office, and I just shut the door, and I sat back down and kept doing like whatever email I was answering. And she was just spewing curse word after curse word and just pacing my office. And I let her have it. And at one point she just stopped and looked at me. And she was like, "You're not going to say anything to me?" And I was like, "I'm letting you have your moment."
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of just looked at me. She was like, "But I'm cursing. I'm, knocking stuff down on you." I said, "Oh, you're going to clean that up. But right now, whatever's in you, I need you to get it out, because I can't talk to you until you get it out." And, that's how I kind of deal with my students. Like, there was no suspension. We talked. She cleaned up. We hugged it out, high-fived, and I sent her back to class. But you cannot expect a student that has all of these things going on, whether it be chemical imbalance, emotional instability, and then no way to deal with it. And then we put them in a school setting that's, where we have mandates, rules, and like a straight line, right? And expect them to just exist. It's never gonna work. So
Right.
that is the primary cause. The overexposure, trauma, but lack of coping skills on the other end. We just don't teach them how to deal with all that they are going through.
Yes. And you spoke to the social and emotional learning a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
which actually the very next question is about strategies that are most effective in dealing with undesirable behavior. So you spoke to exactly how you've done that. But I'm going to ask you to delve in a little deeper. And I'm adding a layer. The layer is this. I was just on the principal Kafele, and I'm sure you were too, listening to him talk about this a little bit. Someone we both deeply respect as an educator. But when you spend your day on the social and emotional learning, sometimes it can feel like, well, how do I get back to the curriculum? How,
Right.
when I'm constantly de-escalating children and my curriculum team says I should be on lesson 5, unit 3, lesson 5 was today, and it didn't happen.
Right. So it's hard, right? There is no magic wand, but you have to, as an educator, you have to figure out, either I deal with it now, right? So that the environment in my classroom will be adequate for learning and safe for learning, and just a place of growth. And so that piece starts all the way back before you even start teaching the curriculum at the beginning of the year, right? So I always, no matter whether I was teaching 6-year-old, well, I never taught 6-year-old, I just might have had them in summer camp. I'm actually scared of them. Whether I was teaching 4th graders, 5th graders, or middle schoolers, right? That's established in relationships and just letting them know who you are as an educator, and also sharing your educational philosophy with them, right? So I always told my students, I love you, I care for you. We're gonna have some good days, some bad days. I'm here to do a job, and so these are the things that I need from you in order to do my job. And then the other side of the conversation is, you allow the students to have the conversation with you. What do you need from me so that I can do my job for you? And so creating that foundation of understanding early on, my students, the incidents, as the years moved on, as the year went on, the incidents didn't last very long, right? And so we my students will understand if I said, okay, we need a pause, right? They knew it was for a reason and it was a rationale. And we were never going to stay in the pause too long unless I really felt like it was something heavy and learning just couldn't go on. But then they had the understanding, okay, if we didn't do lesson 5 unit 2 today, we have to figure out how to make that up. And so creating that family atmosphere within your classroom allows that to go on, right? And so what it turns into, if you do it correctly, right, that SEL piece is embedded in your classroom community, right? And so you have the students, I'm getting chills, so I'm just thinking about all the time that this has happened in my classroom. You have the students who may be having a hard time. Instead of you having to address it, if you set it up and you ingrain that into your classroom, you will never even have to address it. The students will then take the torch and say, yo, Miss TG, can I take him out in the hallway for a second? He's having a moment and just needs somebody to talk to. Or even saying, yo, like, listen, like, I don't mean to use slang, but this is how kids talk. Listen, we're trying to get this lesson. Like, just put your head down and take a second. The students will do that. So if you do it authentically, and this is our favorite phrase, right, with fidelity, right? Because there's a lot of surface stuff that goes on in education. Like, let me just do it so when the administrator comes to my classroom, they can check it off and say I did it. But if you really just ingrain that SEL piece and embed it into every lesson, then it doesn't become that, do I teach or do I address this? It becomes, I can do both, because the students know why I'm doing it, and they know what the consequence, and not a negative consequence, but if we take the time here, we're going to take the time here. Like there will be times where my students will say, like, say, for example, if I was working with a small group that was having trouble, well, Miss TG, can we stay in for recess and get our work done? Or come up here for lunch and get our work done because we missed out and I don't want to have to do it for homework. That's the embedded, that's the community and the culture that so many classes are missing at so many levels. So that's chapter 1.
I agree. And as you were saying about family, creating that family unit, I thought to myself, this is going to set thousands of teachers free.
Absolutely.
Who just haven't been able to get it. They haven't been able to hear it. Everybody knows first month of school is get to know you. Everyone knows that. But how do you create that sense of family within your classroom? I think that's so much more than knowing their favorite color is orange and all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely see teachers everywhere like, oh, light bulb moment. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share.
And that leads me to the question of student growth. What do you think are the most important aspects of education as it relates to student growth?
Excuse me. So it goes back to that whole piece, right? There was a cartoon, I can't remember what cartoon it was, and I think it might have even been like a learning show, because that's all I used to watch a lot when I was younger. But I think we were learning about lemmings and how they kind of just file in and start following one another, and sometimes they will follow each other off a cliff or whatever. But when I think about this question, I just think so many times we just file the kids into the school, right? We give them things to do, but they don't know why they're doing it. Right? Well, this is on the SBAC, or this is good. This is your RI score, right? So true student growth comes when any true amount of growth, student, adult, whoever, from 0 to 100, any true amount of growth can only come when you understand the rationale and the reasoning behind the growth, right? So one of my biggest successes was when I started being very transparent with my students, right? Telling them what the RI test was, what the RI is reading inventory, MI, math inventory, what the numbers meant, what the reasoning meant. And it dawned on me, like my 5th year of teaching, when I had to have the hard conversation with parents. your student is failing reading, right? Or your student scored this on a reading test. And parents who are not educators, when you hear them say your student is having trouble with reading, the first thing they say is, oh, my child can read, not understanding that there's two humongous pieces to reading. There's decoding and there's comprehension. Yeah. So, you know, when it was like, that was like my light bulb moment. Well, if the parents are thinking this and don't understand this, then definitely the students. So that started leading to, you know, having honest conversations with students and breaking down everything. I can remember, and I got this from Equetta Jones, where we would take, remember benchmarks, old-fashioned benchmarks? So the district benchmarks, so they would take the collections test, right? And the students would actually, Equetta made a chart that had all the standards, and then a column for each benchmark throughout the year. And so what we would have the students do was go through and color code. So red was below the standard, yellow was near the standard, green met, blue exceeds, and just simply color in, you know, 5.1, cite text evidence, how did you score? And so what they began to see was, I moved from a red to a yellow, now I'm at my green. And so just having those basic foundations, you could just see the focus on the test shift just within one cycle, right? Because now I know, oh, this question is testing this standard, right? I know as a fifth grader, I know that this standard is looking for me to do this. So in order to meet this standard, this is what they want to see. This is what I have to do. And just giving them that thought process and, you know, celebrating their growth. We would have coloring parties where we would color. Did anybody grow? Show up and show out, you know, and tracking the RI scores and telling them what the reading inventory meant and actually breaking it down to the number of questions for each score strand and tracking, okay, we have 25 students in the class, 18 of them tested in the red, beginning of the year. Now we're at the middle of the year. Look, 17 of those 18 moved to the yellow, 2 of them moved to the green, and like applauding and having parties and celebrating. And when you tell them why they're doing it, they want to do it. But if you just say, and I've heard this even before I became an assistant principal, so please no one call Mr. Green on me. You know, here, do this because it's for my component 5.
Oh, yes.
That has no relevance to that student. And now you're making it personal because if I'm the student who doesn't have the best relationship with you, I don't care about your component 5. And so I'm just going to go through and click, not understanding that that reflects on me and you, but more so me as a student. So when I started understanding that students only grow when they know. Oh, that's chapter 2.
See this? The working meeting.
Students only grow when they know, right? And then so that's the student side, right? But then as a teacher, really using that data to inform your instruction. I think we use that term to drive our instruction too much. It just sounds a little wonky, right? But it informs your instruction. So when I'm collecting all the coloring and I'm looking at like 3 standards and I'm automatically saying, okay, 10 of these kids didn't get these 3 standards. So let me put them in a group. And this week we have this to do, but I also have this to do to reteach and work with them. So it's a constant cycle of learning and evaluation and reviewing and instruction, but you're not the only one doing it as a teacher. And so when I got lessened because I wasn't the only one crunching the data, the students were doing it for me. Not only did my workload get lessened, I began meeting my component 5 because the student growth was there, but you have to make the growth intrinsic. You have to make them want it because they want to see it for themselves, right? And so just make it make sense to them. That's it. That's it.
That's great. Again, I think that's going to open up doors for a lot of teachers who are trying to figure out the assessments and how to get buy-in from students. Definitely. So what do you believe is most needed in education today?
Most needed is flexibility. Second place is transparency. And, you know, when we talk about the revolution will be televised, right? I honestly think we need an education revolution. We have been doing the same thing in different ways for so long that I feel like it's time to try something a little different, right? And so when we look at these schools that work, Ron Clark Academy, number one in my mind. Why do they work? It's because they have revolutionized the infrastructure of education to meet the needs of students, not to accommodate the wishes of adults, right? And so what's most needed in education today is just the flexibility for that transformation. Unfortunately, what drives education is a lot of adult opinions, and no one talks to the kids, right? And so we make all these great, grandiose decisions, and, you know, and honestly, some decisions just have to be made by adults. There are some decisions that we absolutely have to make. But if anyone who has been in any form of commerce, you move based on how your client requires you to move, right? And so if we just have that inkling of a thought in education and the flexibility to do what we need to do in our individual schools for our populations that we serve, because we all know all schools are not equitable. Correct. And we all serve different populations. What you need at your school may not be what I need at my school. The way I do things at my school, you might not be able to do things like that at your school. So just that flexibility, that's the number one thing. And I think also some educators, and this is from top to bottom, just need to have some transparency, right? Teachers have certain types of that we have a very specific personality type, right? Mm-hmm. And the number one thing about a teacher is they don't like being wrong, mm-hmm. right? Or they don't like feeling incompetent, or they don't like admitting to their faults. However, when I was in the classroom, that was one of my best features, and my growth came from doing that. And so I think the imposition of the teacher review system has kind of tightened on some of that a little bit. And so just flexibility on both sides is what's most needed in education today, because unfortunately with COVID, COVID was like a huge mirror in education. Like, let's expose, look at this mirror. There are a lot of inequalities. There's a lot of inefficiency in teachers. I just couldn't believe the amount, how long we've been, you know, a technologically advanced district, but we're still having kids who can't use the technology. So that was like a big, like, what's really going on here? And so we need to pull back the layers and have some honest conversations and flexibility in making some changes in education.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And one of the areas that I'd like to see some flexibility is in the standardized testing.
Absolutely.
I just don't understand how we spend an entire year doing the best we can to create equity in a classroom, and then they all take the same test.
Yep, I agree. And I don't, and that's definitely something that a quick resolve. But standardized testing is more divisive than it is informative.
Agreed. And not a true measure of student growth.
Absolutely. The unfortunate part is, what would be a true measure of student growth? Portfolios, them tracking their own growth, project-based learning, things like that. It costs too much money, and no one can kind of sit at the top and monitor it. And you have teachers who just would not be willing to do it because it would be too overwhelming. But again, that's the flexibility and the transparency. We know what's needed. It just has to be someone that's willing to just shake the table a little bit. And that's why schools like, I will say again, Ron Clark Academy, that's why schools like that work. Because now I'm not well versed to say if they take to, Georgia standardized test or not. However, I do know they use problem-based learning.
Absolutely.
Project-based learning, I'm sorry. And those sorts of things where children explore problems in a real world manner, authentic, and then transfer it back into their learning, right? So public school, public education really needs a table shaking.
Agreed. And I think it's in conversations like this and creating more conversations like this that we get the ball rolling on that. I paid personally to go see Ron Clark about 3 years ago. Just on my own, flew down, did the whole day training. It was amazing. And there were whole, like PTO had paid for whole schools to go. And I would say like staffs of 10, 10, one from each grade level, all went together. And I definitely would love to see something like that happen here in Delaware, where we're taking, key people from each staff to see other schools. It's definitely a dream of mine too.
It's definitely on my bucket list. I met him in person years ago at like a reading.
Diamond State Reading Conference.
Yes.
I met him there too.
I met him years ago. Yes, we were together for more. I've met him years ago and had a chance to have like a 30-second conversation with him and, got the autograph. But he is a phenomenal school leader, and just what he does. And everything he does is based on relationship and relatability, right? The fact that not only is he a school leader, but he still teaches. And not only does he still teach, the fact that he can walk down the hall and kiki with the kids and TikTok and not be, he's not stuffy. So, that's another thing education needs is, remove the stuffiness and just, so the adults need relatability and relationships as well. And that's that if you talk about education, what is your foundation in education? Those two words, relationship and relatability. Like in my head, I'm still 21. So, I carry that through with my kids because they have enough people that are just always, coming at them. If I have to be that person, I can be, but I don't want our encounters to be that all the time. Right. I never forget, Irene Hills was walking past my classroom one day and I could kind of see her head out the window. And then I saw her walk by. And so on my plan, I was like, is everything okay? She was like, no, I just heard laughter coming from your room. And it was like, it made my day. It was the best thing ever. And whatever we were laughing at had nothing to do with the learning. I think somebody just did something silly. And the fact that I was laughing with the kids, that those type of things make the classroom and they make the days go by faster.
That family feel again.
Absolutely.
And another thing you said about the project-based learning and the various other types of frameworks that we could be utilizing costs too much money. But my thought is, if we stop paying for the test, if we stop paying Pearson all the money that we pay Pearson,
who is in Pearson's pockets? I need to know.
then we'd have
Right?
the money for the project-based learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, if done efficiently, that's when you get back to the whole community and schools type deal, right? If you do it efficiently, your community adopts your school and you know, and will be more than willing to help out. You know, we have all of these corporations come into our schools all the time with donations and things like that. And so if you just think, we just need more people that think outside the box. Because I'm also a believer in, if you have teachers who do not share your vision at your school, and if they don't share your vision, that's one thing. But if they don't share your vision and it's to the detriment of the students, then I believe that we should have the flexibility to bid them adieu elsewhere, right? Because then you create toxic situations, you create cyclones of toxicity in your school, and you fight an uphill battle where you might have a team of, let's say, 8 teachers who you come and say, I want you guys to be the universal design for learning. I want you to be the UDL team, and I'm going to pay you to go to workshops, and you're going to bring it back and implement it in the school. We're going to track your scores. If you have one teacher that's like, no, I'm not doing that, my teachers union says I don't have to, that's like a poison, because it permeates everything. So you have 7 classrooms over here doing one activity a certain way, and you look in this classroom and it's still rows, columns, worksheets, and Chromebooks, and no student engagement, no talking, no anything. So that's another thing in education when I say flexibility, the flexibility to get the adults in the building that you need to have in your building.
Wow. Yeah. And that definitely above both our pay grades.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
But it's out there, you know, the thought is out there. And I've heard that over and over. It's necessary that we get qualified individuals. And some of that is intrinsic. You spoke about the intrinsic nature of a child. I think it can be difficult to grow that in an adult.
It can be very difficult.
Not impossible, because we have a growth mindset, but challenging.
Absolutely. And so, you know, hopefully stories, and we've heard this many times in, you know, our workshops, stories change the minds and hearts of people. And so, you know, even in a situation like that, hopefully the stories of the other 7 teachers, for example, will begin to, you know, because I know I was on a team, and I don't know about your period 5, but my period 5 was the period where I was like, you know, they made me earn every last coin I earned was period 5. But it just got to a point where I love to see them come every day, because I, you know, built the relationship and things like that I know that they needed, right? And so you had that teacher. Well, why does he act that way in your class but not in mine? I said, oh, let's ask him. And it came to, you know, just having a conversation with the student, and the student being able to tell the teacher, well, when I go in Miss TG's class, you know, even if I talk a little bit, she's not going to put me out. I can ask her for help and not feel like, you know, I'm stupid. But the fact that the child was able to have that conversation, then that was a story that then changed the heart and the mind of the teacher to say, okay, let me just try relaxing off of them just a little bit. And it didn't work every day, but it felt better for that child going to that class every day.
Yes. And you talk about stories. This is storytelling as well. So I feel like we're creating an important dialogue that will help teachers reflect
Absolutely.
and grow through. And are there any pieces of literature that you would say have been golden for you along the years, like along your journey?
Absolutely. So so our district invested a lot of money in Ruby Payne, right? But it just was something that did not sit well with me to just dive head first into her framework for teaching students of poverty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I think you may have introduced me to Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu.
Yes.
So I read his answer to her framework, right? Because you have to read both sides. And I can say I was just lit up on fire. So Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu is definitely one of my go-tos. I'm laughing because I kind of have them all sitting around me. Marcia Tate, this book right here, I don't know if you can see it.
Yep.
Marcia Tate, Shouting Won't Grow Dendrites. Another phenomenal book, and you can see it's very weathered. And it's techniques for managing a brain compatible classroom. I also have shared this with some of my new teachers because it was shared. I went to her workshop, and just the basic playing music in the background and giving them a signal to return their attention. That's one of mine. Who else do I have down here? Dr. Kafele. It's so funny that I literally have all this stuff right here. Dr. Kafele, I'm reading Assistant Principal 50 right now. Cheers. Yeah, that's my next one after this. That's my next one. Dr. Kafele, we met him through our district as well. Another phenomenal speaker on fire. The book I read from him was dealing with how to get Black male students to succeed in life and in your classroom. That was my number one go-to. When you read one book by an author, you just kind of keep going through them. This new series that I found on Facebook, hacking, I'm sorry, it's hard to see them because of my hacking leadership. So it's a hacking, it's called the Hack Learning Series, right? And so they have hacking school leadership, hacking education, hacking school discipline. And the way the book is set up, it presents a problem, right? It gives you a hack, how to do it, how to fix it. Then it gives you what you can do right away. So, every time we leave workshops, we want, well, what am I taking back to the classroom? So it gives you something that you could do right away. It's called, what can you do tomorrow? Then it gives you tips on how to sustain it for longevity. So it's a really easy read. Another book that I read had to deal with like ADHD and techniques for disruptive students. And it basically just taught me that disruption always isn't, it may be a problem for you initially, but it always isn't a problem. It most likely is like a cry out for attention or help. You have to figure out the why behind the what they're doing, right? And so instead of treating the what they're doing, you just figure out why they're doing it and treat the why, right? And then it'll happen less frequently. And then the final one, I watched a presentation on this author. I haven't read his book yet. That's on my summer reading list, but it's Hamish Brewer, and it's called Relentless. The Tattooed Skateboarding Principle.
Oh, wow. That looks good.
So he has like a 15-minute like video on YouTube I just stumbled across where he goes into his philosophy and things, and I was like, oh, okay. And he doesn't look like us, which is like interesting, but he is like so cool. He doesn't dress up every day for work. He's not that stuffy principal. And on my bucket list, by my 45th, I'm gonna get my tattoo sleeve finished. So started. That's my goal. But that's why he stuck out to me, because I was like, oh my gosh, he's a principal with a whole arm sleeve tattoo. But that is the relatability and the relationship. So his appearance means nothing professionally because he's getting the job done through relatability and relationship. So those are my go-tos. You can see they're literally right around me.
I love it. And what about educators who have paved the way for you?
Oh my goodness. So you're trying to make me cry here, Dr. Townsend. So I just remember, so you know how a person who has a negative experience with you can have a positive impact? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this first person, I never forget, her name was Mrs. Chevalier. I was in the 3rd grade, and she embarrassed me so bad. I did not, multiplication it was very abstract. It was an abstract concept for me. So for me, and the way that I learned, me just memorizing stuff doesn't make sense to me because I have to know why it works. So ironically enough, with the math the students have now, I would have done better with that math than the math we grew up with, right? Traditional math. So I had to stand for 2 days in front of the board, 2 days, completing math problems in front of the whole class. And this, when I say 2 days, I'm talking 3rd grade, go into the classroom, do morning meeting or circle or whatever it was called. And because I was an avid reader, I didn't have to do reading group, right? So what she would do is for those 2 days, I literally just had to stand in front of the board and write the multiplication tables on the front board in chalk. So embarrassing. And from that point, I just started hating math. So she basically taught me what never to do, like never try to teach through embarrassing your student. It's never that serious. Like your feelings as an adult are never that serious as a teacher, right? I always say adult feelings should never trump student success. And so that was a bad example, but it turned me into an amazing teacher because no matter how much the students got on my nerves, and not to say that I was perfect all the time, but it was never my intention to embarrass them in any way that I had to discipline or redirect or speak to. And if that happened unintentionally, I was very apologetic as publicly as the correction was. Yeah. Another teacher, I have 3. So my second teacher in elementary school, I finally got out of that school because they realized that I was actually gifted, right? And so they put me in the talented and gifted program. But the obstacle in that program was I was one of only 2 Black people in the class. And so that was and so not only was I one of only 2 Black people, out of the 2 Black people, I was the only one who lived in the city. And so I really didn't relate to the other girl. We're best of friends to this day. But initially I didn't relate to her. I didn't relate to anybody in the classroom. I felt poor in that class. And so I just had this teacher who, Ronnie Cohen, she's still around. She does the money school now. Oh yeah, with the state of Delaware. And so there were days where we had this like little change jar and kids would kind of just put money in. I can't even remember why they would put money in there, but there were days where I didn't have lunch money and she would just get it out the change jar. Or I couldn't go on a trip and somehow I went on that trip and I didn't know, or she never made me feel different. She always encouraged me that I was the same, if not better, than the other people that I was kind of going in my shell around in the classroom, just because it was a new experience for me. So I took that with me into teaching. Like, just know your kids, help them out any way you can. But in her help, she also empowered me, right? So we don't just want to help and pacify and try to fix a problem at a surface level. We also want to empower. A lot of teachers come to me like, I don't know what to do. You can help them, but also teach them how to help themselves, right? And so my third teacher was in high school. Well, I had two. Miss Mary Stanley, because she was like one of the first Black female teachers that I had that was just like, you know, OG, wore a suit to work every day with her heels. You can hear her clacking down the hallway, just beautifully put together. And I just remember saying, I want to dress like that. You know, she was smart and informative. So that was my first like real Black teacher that I could just really model myself after. And then the final teacher was Mr. David Bradley from Mount Pleasant High as well. He just retired, I found out, I think, a couple years ago. But I was friends. So this is how, you know, cycles go. Mm-hmm. So his daughter was in the 4th grade class at PS, right? And she befriended me, and she was actually like the first Caucasian who invited me over for a sleepover. And so then fast forward, now I have him as a teacher in high school. So he was always like just so inclusive, just so nice. And what sticks out to me about him was I had him for 2 years, 11th, 12th grade, while my dad was preparing to transition. And so I was just really angry, just this really angry person. And he invited me to take his philosophy class. And I was just like, whatever, I don't really need the credit. But in his philosophy class, I think the activities that he did were very therapeutic for me and very intentional. And even when I would try to not turn in an assignment, he would call me and kind of walk me through it. And that was, and I always remember him saying, no matter what you're going through, you're going to get through it, right? And so he didn't know it at the time. I had expressed to him that my dad was, you know, basically dying. He didn't know it at the time, but he was very instrumental in literally getting me through my senior year, because it was really touch and go there for a while. So I just remember all these things. I just remember all these things when I'm doing my sessions in class, like when I'm teaching and just being around other people's children. And I just try to remember the lessons that I've learned from my teachers and try to pass it along as well.
That is awesome. And I feel like I'm a better educator just by listening to you share your story.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate you taking the time out to be with me and the audience today. In closing, knowing that the book is coming and that you are available for workshops and consulting, can you share your information and how you can be reached?
Okay, so I can be reached. My phone number is 302-635-0937. You can leave a message or send a text. My personal email address is teacher325@msn.com. That's teacher325@msn.com. That is my personal email address.
Awesome. So feel free to reach out to Miss TG. That is how she is affectionately known. Yes, for speaking engagements, workshops, and to further grow yourself as an educator. So we thank you for your time today, and tune in with us again.
Thank you so much.